will reach 90,000 housing units, and the Libyan Republic has set up and created two factories for prefabricated housing, which will produce 5 housing units per day, and the cost of this project was $150 million US. The main target of these projects is to satisfy the needs of citizens who are underprivileged and to provide the necessary housing for the family. The state is also making credit facilities to limited income groupings by granting long-term interest-free loans. As a result of these efforts, Mr. Chairman, was raising the rate of production of our housing units, which was 10 housing units to every 1,000 inhabitants, which is considered as the highest among the world rates. Mr. President, creating the necessary environment does not mean housing only, but this requires the necessary infrastructure for the various communities, including potable drinking water, sewage system, roads, parks, etc. And allocations have been made to this effect and have reached 1,920 million US. And since the land is considered as the basic element for human settlements, a law was promulgated in 1972 forbidding speculation of land and has levied an annual tax on open areas which have not been utilized. Mr. President, the dispersion of population is among the problems confronting my country, and the state has initiated projects for great agricultural integrated plans with the aim of increasing the agricultural output. The project will call for the reclamation of 1.5 million hectares of land and the creation of 100 model villages in the rural areas and in a line parallel to the densely populated coastal strip. The allocation for this project have amounted to $1,500 million. This, Mr. President, is a glimpse of the efforts of my country in the field of human settlements. The paper, which has been presented to this conference by my delegation, will give details of our activities. Mr. President, the greatest danger which today threatens human settlements is the warfare and what this leaves behind, and particularly mining. The United Nations has recognized the danger emanating from this, and in the 30th session of the General Assembly, Resolution 3435 was passed, which was sponsored by the Libyan Republic, regarding mines which had been laid during World War II and laid by the fighting parties. And in the light of the resolution, my delegation would like to reconfirm here that the success of this conference would be the complete condemnation of warfare and wars and what they leave behind them, and particularly mines. And the responsibility should fall on those who have committed these crimes, and they should be asked to pay compensation for the damage accruing. Mr. President, since the objective of this conference is human settlements, there are those who are seeking to destroy and expel their homelands, and we have vivid proof of that, of what is happening in Palestine and what the Palestine people are subject to by the Zionist racist regime, which is considered as one of the worst forms of terrorism, destruction, expulsion, and making the people of Palestine homeless and occupying Arab lands and creating human settlements on that is not only to be condemned by the United Nations, but but a firm stance should be adopted by the international community vis-à-vis all these acts. Mr. President, unless we stand against the racist regimes in Palestine, South Africa, and Rhodesia, then the works of this conference and the other conferences will all be in vain and will fall to the aspirations of all of us participating in this conference. Mr. President, and to conclude, my delegation feels that we cannot raise the socio-economic standards of the peoples of the world unless the existent economic order is changed by a new economic order according to what will be endorsed by the international family. and this can be attained through the realization of a political will and desire. My delegation puts great hopes on this our conference, and hope that we will adopt resolutions in the field of international cooperation to attain the welfare for mankind and for the peoples of the world through the efforts which have been deployed by the various organizations and human settlements within a coordinated, harmonious system. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now, I would like you to see the capsule.
One of the main targets of the Libyan
من أهم أهداف الجمهورية العربية
provide housing for all the people, to solve their settlement problems, and to ensure a better and happier life for them all. social injustice which characterized life before the 1st of September.
I thank the Minister of Municipalities of the Libyan Arab Republic. Under Rule 52, I invite the head of the delegation of the African National Congress of South Africa, Mr. Sindiso Mfanyana. I invite him to the rostrum.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the African National Congress feels honored to be given this opportunity to address the representatives of the entire world who are agreed that the quality of life is largely determined by the conditions of human settlements, which are the habitat of mankind. As representatives of the oppressed people of South Africa, we are particularly grateful to address this gathering of people who have the power and will to determine and plan the quality of life of their respective people. For they will be able to understand what we mean when we say that the black 21 million people of South Africa are completely cut off from the decision-making bodies in the South Africa of today, which is ruled by 4 million white people of European descent. The question of a minority ruling over a majority is not unknown to the world, but South Africa is the only country where your pigmentation, the color of your skin, has been legally made the decisive factor which determines your way of life. From the time you are born, in fact, even before you are born, you are already predestined to serve the interests of a white master. Whatever human feelings, desires, or capabilities you may possess are legally supposed to be channeled towards making the white man rich, happy, and if possible, secure. You are simply a necessary accident which needs thousands of laws to mold you into a useful instrument to make your white master live in heavenly conditions on earth. In short, the white people of South Africa have consistently opted for an all-white regime backed by an army which is willing and ready to pursue policies of dehumanizing the black South African. We are addressing ourselves to people who have been instrumental in passing a resolution which condemned apartheid as a crime against humanity. The majority of the distinguished delegates present here have attested to the fact that the policies pursued by the white minority regime in South Africa are not only genocidal in terms of the black South African, but are a serious threat to human lives in the African continent and beyond. This conference has correctly singled out the question of land ownership as prima facie to human habitat. Land is what every human being lives on. A people dispossessed of land is a people being denied the right to livelihood, to their very existence. Therefore, when 4 million whites, by force of arms, arbitrarily allot themselves 87% of the South African land and dictate that 21 million black people should live in the remaining 13%, what they are doing is simply to deny the black South African his God-given right to live. The present generation of the African people in South Africa has to bear with a situation where throughout the whole country, practically everywhere you go, you are reminded that your grandfather and grandmother used to live here as free people, but you yourself have to ask permission to move in your own motherland. This 13% of the land, the Bantustans, is being offered by the South African regime in the guise of giving the indigenous people independence. These Bantustans are 10 amorphous and artificially created areas for 10 supposed African tribes into which any African who can no longer be adequately exploited is forced to move. The first Bandustan, the Transkei, will be granted its dubious independence in October of this year. The governing puppets of the Transkei are already lobbying for international recognition and approval as an independent state. Many delegates have raised the question of the danger of population explosion. They have talked about the real or exaggerated threat of there being too many people on our planet. For us, this question is overshadowed by the fact that we see other human beings in our country consuming 12 to 20 times more than us simply because their skin is white. The black working people have engaged in strikes demanding higher wages, especially during the last 3 years. All we ask is to be given an equitable share in the wealth we create in the gold, diamond, copper, and other mines. All we ask is to be given equal pay for equal work. We say that the wealth we have created to make South Africa one of Africa's richest countries should be shared by all the inhabitants of South Africa. But all they have offered is the 13% of land and a minute portion of the wealth. To us, therefore, it is not simply a question of population explosion which accounts for human misery. It is the blatant conscious policy of racial discrimination, exploitation, oppression, and dehumanization practiced by the South African white regime against our people, which accounts for the misery of our people. The nucleus of any human society is the family. Yet in South Africa, the very core of black human society is being deliberately eroded and destroyed. Men are not allowed to live with their wives and children by law. Since 1964, no African woman can move from a village area and go to join her husband working in an urban area unless she herself was born in that urban area. Black women and children are regarded as superfluous appendages to the black working man. As if that was not sufficient, whole communities are uprooted every year in order to give space to the white masters to scratch themselves in comfort. All this the white South Africans can do because they have the military power behind them. To the black men in South Africa, the country is a police state with a daily average prison population of 99,000 overwhelmingly black people. Of the 68 legal executions carried out in 1975, there were no whites, 50 were African, and 18 were colored, or what we are sometimes referred to as mulattoes, and what we refer to as part of the black South African population. The whites in South Africa would be unable to survive with this inhuman policy if it were not for the moral and material support they receive from outside interests. The role which the multinational corporations with investments in South Africa have played in supporting the apartheid regime in South Africa can only be explained if one understands that they get returns of up to 27% on their investments. And this is possible because of the super exploitation of black labor. The South African regime has shown itself not only to be oppressive to the black people of South Africa, but is a willing instrument to recolonize independent Africa. The aggression of the South African army into nascent Angola is known to all. The expansionist designs of the disciples of Hitler now ruling South Africa is no secret. It is at this moment that the French government finds it profitable to supply nuclear reactors to South Africa, as South Africa, which not only has not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but has over the years consistently flouted all United Nations resolutions on human rights and has frequently boasted of her capacity to build nuclear weapons. We are here talking of the ways and means of improving human settlements, but unless this conference takes decisions to actively counter policies and practices of wanton genocide, as is being practiced by the Foster regime in South Africa, the people of South Africa, of Namibia and Zimbabwe, indeed of the African continent, might not be there to discuss any further plans for improving human settlement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the head of the delegation of the African National Congress of South Africa. I now give the floor to the honorable member of the National Planning Commission of Nepal, His Excellency Dr. Ratna Shamshera J.B. Rana.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Nepalese delegation, may I express our sincere appreciation to the United Nations for giving us this opportunity to voice our views on the important question of human settlement. I would also like to thank the Government of Canada and its people for the warm and generous hospitality accorded to us. Mr. President, it is plain that the peoples of the world suffer from the widespread lack of adequate settlement. However, the intensity and pattern of negative conditions arising from these inadequacies differ among nations. The provision of human settlement, one of man's most basic needs, is a problem. We are simply unable to create settlements of the quality, low cost, and at a rate fast enough to provide decent shelter for much of mankind. Human settlements have always played a fundamental role in the economic, social, and cultural development of nations. Given the increasing complexity of the development process, especially when the struggle for development depends on dramatic increases in productivity, greater reliance will have to be placed on urban and rural communities in the coming decades. Ostensibly, in economies with a relatively high levels of development, distortions in human settlements appear to be the result of man's effort towards a better life. In developing countries, the settlement problems are the result of poverty, inadequate development, or lack of proper planning. These problems are essentially the result of our economic inability to act. Problems of human settlement in rural areas are linked to the conditions of rural poverty, increasing population pressures on limited land resources, and the inability to rapidly increase agricultural productivity. There is a lack of capital resources for the improvement or merely for the maintenance of agricultural productivity. In urban areas, most problems are linked to the low level of industrial employment and the inability of the public utility facilities to cope with the rapid population growth. The creation of the necessary conditions for improvement requires a greater rate of development. Basic to this is the initial ability to save, a very difficult condition to achieve given the subsistence level of our economy. Problems of human settlements in Nepal are intimately connected with its geophysical conditions and levels of socio-economic development. With a short history of 2 decades of planned development, Nepal is making steady progress in its bid to modernize her economy and improve the living conditions of its people. Human settlements in Nepal are distributed over a small part of the country. With an average annual rate of population growth of 2.16%, the population density is estimated at 91 persons per square kilometer. Approximately 94% of the total population is dependent upon agriculture. Agriculture contributes 66% of the total GDP, while industry contributes only about 9%. About 5% of the total population of Nepal lives in urban areas. More than half of the urban population is concentrated in the Kathmandu Valley. This brief statement indicates the extent of the low level of development in Nepal. However, many of our problems are still relatively simple compared with those of other developing countries, where rapid urbanization has occurred. Mr. President, environmental problems have also been considered by the policymakers in my country. Major problems are soil erosion, degradation of cropped area, indiscriminate destruction of forest resources, intrusion of farming into marginal areas, and inter-regional migration. We believe that it is important to consider methods of preserving and improving the quality of life without reducing the rate of economic growth. My country has taken steps to prevent unplanned growth of human settlements through legislation and by encouraging certain popular customs and traditions. The Department of Housing, Building and Physical Planning is engaged in the preparation of master plans for each of the 4 regional development centers. Furthermore, the government has been conducting a program of resettlement of the landless. My country has also encouraged the establishment of national forest and wildlife reserves and sanctuaries. Afforestation program have been a regular aspect of the work of the Ministry of Forest. In view of the imbalanced growth of different regions, we believe that the provision of a balanced regional development program is imperative for improving the quality of life. It is in this context that our 5th plan attempts to reduce the regional imbalance created by the wide development disparity between different regions. This has necessitated changes in the patterns of resource allocation, especially in favor of the relatively underdeveloped far western and western regions. We have realized that an increase in national income is a necessary condition for a higher standard of living, but this in itself does not lead to an equitable distribution of development benefits. The current 5th plan aims at growth with social justice through the regionalization of the development efforts. My country has identified population control, employment generation, scientific land use, and fuller utilization of water resources as priority areas for development. Enlistment of mass participation in the development process through regional development policies is one of my country's major objectives. Mr. President, our priority in national development is the provision of basic life requirements. His Majesty King Birendra has said, quote, "Just as I have affection for my country and my people, so also I bear my responsibility to alleviate the suffering of my sick and hungry countrymen," unquote. Since the problem of human settlement in both rural and urban areas are the result of what has been called the pollution of poverty or underdevelopment, direct attack on problems of human settlement in developing countries without first attacking the causes of poverty is likely to miss the real target. We hope that solutions or recommendations for action will not concentrate solely on consequences, but will also deal with the basic causes of the problems confronting human settlement. If we fail to do so, serious diversion of resources from the real needs of development may occur. In closing, Mr. President, permit me to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I would also like to thank once again the government and the people of Canada for the courtesy and hospitality extended to us. Thank you, Mr. President. May I now have the capsules, please?
From the sacred heel of Swayambhunath, the all-seeing eyes of Buddha watch over the valley of Kathmandu. The glory of nature blends with the legends, the philosophies, and the profound religious principles which affect the lives of every person. For as the Kathmandu Valley is the political and cultural heart of Nepal, religion is its spiritual soul. Our places of worship are visited daily by the people, and for some are their homes as well. Their mellowed stones and intricate carvings, the background for every life activity. It is a total environment in which every aspect of life is interrelated, an environment which we hope to preserve. To do so, solutions are being sought to many problems. There is a need to improve the quality and the quantity of our water sources. There is a need for adequate waste disposal, for sewerage and sanitation facilities, for more of our people to have the means to lead healthier lives. Many dwellings need repair. Some temples have suffered the ravages of time, their decor missing or decayed beyond repair. Major government plans are being implemented to deal with these problems. As part of an integrated, comprehensive development scheme, work has begun. An improved water supply system is underway. And existing water sources are being rehabilitated. If our deep-rooted tradition and culture is to survive, we have learned that change must be selective. Education is vital, both within the classroom and beyond, for people of every age and every background. Our main objective is to preserve the best of our past while enabling our people to look ahead to a better future. Namaste. Nepal is a small mountainous country divided into 3 geographical regions. The Terai to the south used to be a lowland of malaria jungles. Malaria eradication opened the land to settlement. The Terai's rich topsoil and proximity to Indian markets have in the past led the government to concentrate heavily on this region. It was hoped that the Terai would eventually furnish the resources for the development of Nepal's other regions. To the north lies the hill region. Its economy is based almost entirely on agriculture. Search for more land has led to deforestation with accompanying erosion. The result has been a net loss of land and a deteriorating economy. To the north lies the mountain region and the Tibeto-marginal zone. This northernmost region has traditionally relied on marginal agriculture and trade with Tibet. Animal husbandry is practiced on a significant scale. But changes along the northern border have dislocated the old trade pattern. The lack of essential services makes life in this hostile climate especially difficult. As a result, the mountain population has begun to migrate mainly to the Terai. This has caused deforestation and related problems. In 1970, the government introduced a divisional plan, dividing the country into 4 economic regions. Highest priority has been given to the least developed regions. Regional centers have been created to better cope with regional problems. Health and education programs were also decentralized. To ease the problem of migration, a rural resettlement program has been introduced. Regional development is aimed at improving the economies of the native regions. The 1970 plan is only the first step toward change, toward planned development, toward planned exploitation of natural resources, and toward economic and social security for everyone on a more equitable basis.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the honorable member of the National Planning Commission of Nepal. Under Rule 52nd, I invite the Administrative Secretary of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, South Africa, Mr. Mokelake Elias Neteldive, to speak.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I want to take this early opportunity on behalf of my leader, Mangalisha Sobukwe, the President of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, and on behalf of the oppressed and exploited millions in Azania, to first and foremost express our sincere gratitude to you, sir, and those responsible for the reorganization and organization of this conference, for the kind invitation extended to us to participate in your deliberations as an observer. May I also associate my delegation with the sentiments expressed by several distinguished delegates in congratulating you, sir, on your election to such a post of great responsibility, and there is no doubt that you will continue to steer and direct the activities of this august body with determination during this trying period of human existence. Mr. President and distinguished delegates, we bring you the problematical greetings from 21 million black people of no fixed habitation in Azania. While the focus of the problems of many nations assembled here may be upon better ways to provide and beautify men's shelter, our people are fighting to lay claim to the right to such shelter on their ancestral land. Racist South Africa likes to boast of being the most advanced country in Africa. Indeed, it has some of the tallest and most beautiful buildings in the world. And yet our people live in colonial bondage in the 20th century. The majority of them still live in their old slave hovels comprising mud, twig, or grass structures. They have no choice but to wear the old tattered slave clothes which the white masters have discarded. They still eat their protein-starved food. They are still exposed to the brutal health hazards of a deprived existence. And yet, they are not sure even of that precarious existence from one day to another. They are exposed to a program that is euphemistically referred to as resettlement, usually on some arid bushland which nobody else wants or is capable of living in. These, of course, are forced removals of people from what they may have regarded as their homes. These removals are always accompanied with much conflict and brutality. More often than not, the people are settled without housing at all, without facilities or services of any kind, and without any means of subsistence. It is pertinent at the same time to take into account the circumstances in which some of these people are forcibly settled. They may be old men and women who have spent all their lives working for whites. They are dumped away like absolute machinery to wither away as best as they can. Thousands of families are uprooted, transplanted, and then dumped like garbage, using the most brutal and barbaric methods. Further, they may in addition be dumped there riddled with disease caused by the work they did without relief or compensation or medical care. They may be widows driven out of the towns when their husbands died, who must nonetheless bring up their children in that wilderness. They may be political deportees who have been deprived of the privilege to earn a living. Some of them may be granted a small pension or be entitled to some food rations. Even dogs owned by white persons have better roofs over their heads, eat better food, and consequently wear better clothes. This may sound a joke. We are aware that looking at the human settlement problem, this August Assembly is not only looking at those countries that are free and independent under majority rule, but the agonizing situation in countries still under colonial and racist minority rule should be of concern if this problem of human settlement is to be looked at from a global point of view. We do not believe that habitat and concerned relevant international bodies can close their eyes to the callous contempt for human suffering, the ugliness of systematic cruelty, and the self-righteousness of the racist oppressor in South Africa. What is shocking, to say the least, is that the situation, as brutal and as horrifying as it is, does not seem to stir the conscience of those nations of Western Hemisphere who are interested in the profits they get from the application of such cruel, inhuman policies because of their investments in apartheid. There is no shame at all in the actions of these hypocrites who protest that their dislike of apartheid, but insist at the same time that such a system should not be overthrown and destroyed in order to save and protect humanity. Mr. President, when the question of human settlement is discussed, one cannot forget or lose sight of the fact that 2.5 million Palestinians are presently without a home, and no justice can be done in getting solution of human settlement without taking into account their fate. They cannot be refugees for the rest of their lives. Today, finally, Mr. President, the 21 million black people are forced to occupy only 13%, and 4 million whites have arrogated to themselves the most fertile part of the land. Finally, sir, the international community, as represented here by 140 plus nations, has recognized the struggle of our people and exploited people of human rights and self-determination as their responsibility. This is highly appreciated by us, who have always expressed the desire to be free to make a contribution to mankind's advancements. It is our fervent hope that on this occasion, in the context of this program of human settlements, this conference will support our cause for the restoration of lands. Finally, sir, we must, in all seriousness, draw your attention to the fraud of independence that is being perpetrated in our country at the present time. It is simple to understand that racist South Africa is insistent upon shaking her responsibility through the guise of placing it upon the shoulders of its black stooges because she can no longer justify her defiance of world public opinion. No one in the country regards the so-called ethnic independence as a solution to the problem in our country. The racist regime and its black stooges, however, want foster parents for their monstrosity. We take, sir, the opportunity to urge the nations assembled here to refuse to grant any recognition of this political fraud as representing an act of decolonization. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the Administrative Secretary of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, South Africa. The next speaker is the High Commissioner for Trinidad and Tobago to Canada, His Excellency Mr. Matthew Ramcharan. I give him the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I would like on behalf of the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago to congratulate you on your election to preside over this very important and timely conference. I would like also to express our deep gratitude to the Government of Canada for the excellent arrangements they have provided for this United Nations Conference on Human Settlements. Mr. Enrique Peñalosa and his staff should also be greatly complimented for their hard work and competence in making such efficient preparations for this conference. The Government of Trinidad and Tobago regards this conference as one of the most significant held under the auspices of the United Nations. We had the honor and privilege to participate in its entire preparatory process, and it is with a sense of full commitment to the goals of the conference that we have come together with other delegations here. We trust that our joint endeavor would result in concrete realization of the purposes for which this conference has been convened. As my government sees it, the overriding purpose of this Conference on Human Settlements is to achieve an improvement and enhancement of the quality of life for present and future generations in a just, democratic, and progressive society. In order to achieve this purpose, we believe that governments and people should individually and collectively strive to equip every individual with the means for attaining personal fulfillment and the requisites for satisfying his basic needs for shelter, employment, health, education, recreational, and cultural pursuits. To create systems which afford equal access and opportunities by all people to the benefits of development. To establish a mechanism of international interchange and cooperation that recognizes the rights of all people to a better quality of life and supports their efforts in the attainment of this by providing through appropriate institutions adequate shares of the world resources in accordance with their needs. The government of Trinidad and Tobago is convinced that human settlements can and must become the unifying concept for the achievement of these objectives. This conference, through its preparatory process, has already made considerable progress towards the achievement of these objectives by creating worldwide awareness of the issues of human settlement. More now than ever before, the international community is keenly aware of the problems involved. The task before this conference is to provide solutions and to generate a sense of urgency among all nations on the level of the international community in applying these solutions. For this reason, we look to the Declaration of Principles as the fundamental instrument for sounding the clarion call for action. We are satisfied that the working documents of the conference adequately cover the problems, needs, and perspectives of human settlement. We therefore do not consider it necessary to enumerate these at this time. We do feel it necessary, however, to remind this conference that every society is in some way unique in its social, cultural, and political characteristics. Human settlements reflect in many ways these characteristics of the societies and peoples from which they have evolved. The solutions, therefore, to the problems of human settlements, which this conference would find, though having general applicability in many respects, must also be flexible enough in their perspectives to be adapted to the peculiarities of the societies and the aspirations of their peoples. The factor of housing is perhaps one of the clearest examples of this need for adaptability of solutions to the problems of human settlement. It is now generally accepted that the most acceptable forms of shelter are those which reflect and satisfy the socio-cultural synthesis of a people or nation. Since the component of satisfactory shelter constitutes such a large part of the human settlement need in all countries, it is clear that a search for innovative and socio-culturally unique solutions must constitute a focal consideration of this conference. What we have outlined above, Mr. President, are our perspectives of this conference. Let me now indicate the expectations of the Trinidad and Tobago delegation. Mr. President, the government of Trinidad and Tobago fully recognizes the needs and aspirations of its peoples for a better quality of life. We therefore seek support for our own efforts at improvement in our housing stock through slum clearance and rehabilitation, in the provision of new housing, expansion of water supplies, and the installation of sanitation facilities, the creation of new jobs, and the provision of education and social services. We accept that efforts at improvement must be placed within a comprehensive plan framework that integrates all aspects of life and the man-made environment with the natural environment. Our society further acknowledges the right of every family to adequate shelter and a safe and satisfactory community life, and the right of every citizen to the means for personal fulfillment and enjoyment of an equitable share of the benefits of the society. We are committed to the propositions that the establishment of human settlements must be a basic component of national development plans for both urban and rural areas. That efforts should be made to slow down the flow of people to the overcrowded cities and to upgrade the economic and social conditions of the rural poor. That industrial locations must be judiciously chosen in order to encourage decentralization and the growth of settlements in all parts of the country, and that a more balanced relationship must be created between urban and rural areas and so control excessive growth of cities. As a developing country, we recognize the need and the opportunity to ensure that rural areas are developed simultaneously with urban areas, to prevent the indiscriminate conversion of agricultural land to urban use by adoption of a strict land policy, to encourage and support local effort in harmony with local circumstances, to achieve a transformation of human settlements through a change in social and economic interrelationships, and by making planning and settlement development an integral part of our economic, social, and cultural policies. Mr. President, it is clear that one of the main contributions that any country can make to the solution of its human settlement problems is by the effective use of indigenous resources. To us in Trinidad and Tobago, this implies more concerted efforts at mobilization of the country's natural and human resources, the promotion of greater self-reliance, and increased public participation in planning for development. Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago's audiovisual presentation at this conference demonstrates how these objectives have been achieved in 3 housing programs based on what we call the Partnership in Housing concept. In the film which we invite fellow delegates to view, housing for lower-income families has been made possible through the mobilization of financial and human resources in 3 partnerships made up of government and people, government, a sugar company and its workers, an oil company and its employees, and certain financial institutions. Recently, a form of partnership involving government through the National Housing Authority and the private sector has been developed to provide housing for the lower-income groups in the country. The most significant attempt made to mobilize the domestic resources of the country brought together recently and on the initiative of the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, the Right Honorable Dr. Eric Williams, all the financial institutions, banks, insurance companies, the business community, the cooperatives, the professional bodies, and those involved in construction, the labor sector, and government in a symposium on the mobilization of domestic financial resources. The overriding objective of all this, Mr. President, is for Trinidad and Tobago to explore fully all avenues for effective mobilization and the use of the country's resources, natural, human, and financial, in improving the quality of life of its peoples. We are willing to share the knowledge of the results of our efforts and experiences with all nations, and to learn through the medium of this conference and the instruments of exchange and interchange it would develop of the experiences and successes of other countries in their efforts at developing human settlement programs. Enriched by these experiences and securing the knowledge that the international community recognizes the need and urgency for comprehensive and effective human settlement programs, we join with all countries in seeking to define an established plan of action to achieve these ends. We propose to continue our efforts in seeking national solutions to the problems of human settlement. We are convinced, however, that national efforts would not be sufficient in the process of solutions are to be accelerated and given the urgency it requires. International assistance, international cooperation, and international resources are also necessary and essential. As a developing country, we are keenly aware of the invaluable role that international cooperation and assistance can play in accelerating the process of growth and development. For this reason, one of the major outcomes which Trinidad and Tobago expects from this conference is the mobilization of large-scale and effective international financial and technical assistance for countries like ours in their human settlement development and the establishment of suitable institutional arrangements for the implementation of this assistance. We therefore intend to work towards strengthening, restructuring, and rationalizing where appropriate international institutions which will best meet our expectations for international cooperation and assistance in this field. We would like to work in cooperation with all delegates towards a generally agreed and acceptable range of principles, policies, and strategies whose implementation will stimulate, promote, and accelerate the integrative process of development with human settlement as its unifying element. I thank you, Mr. President. I now ask for the capsule.
The independent country of Trinidad and Tobago, former British colonies and now a member of the British Commonwealth of Nations, is situated in the southern Caribbean, 7 miles away from the Venezuelan mainland. Its population, over 1 million, all but